But I mean, you think of all the major religions: Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus. Of course, we're coming from a patriarchal background, so all the avatars are like male, you know.
Yeah, of course.
But in Marguerite's work, Margaret Rigolesio's work, in her two books on the Greek priestesses, she shows the lineage of parthenogenetic women giving birth to other parthenogenetic women, like Athena, the inventor of democracy. Her mother was born that way as well, and so was Athena.
Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
But so, without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about Dan. Dan actually has been on my radar for a few years now, and so I'm very grateful that we finally were able to connect, and the timing was right to have him come on the show today. He is a self-taught surrealist artist. He's an innovative musician, a poet, and writer, as well as a lifelong researcher into life's great mysteries. Back in, I believe it was 2015, he released a book, Parthenogenesis, Woman's Long-Lost Ability to Self-conceive. It's a very interesting topic, and from what I've read in the book, I have a feeling we're really going to enjoy this discussion. So let me welcome, without further ado, Dan Poitras. Welcome to the show, Dan. How are you today?
Very good. Thanks, Bernard. This is great. I'm really looking forward to this.
Me too. And by the way, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Wow. So
yeah.
my Hispanic upbringing helps a little bit. Anyway, so you're joining us live from, are you in Massachusetts?
Right.
Okay.
About 60 miles west of Boston, out in the boonies.
Oh, very nice. I actually I stayed up in the Amherst area for a few months, a couple of years back, in the winter of all times. But
yeah.
It was absolutely beautiful country. I mean, what a beautiful area that is, definitely. So, Dan, why don't we start off with how this all started? What was it that led you down this convoluted path of wanting to research and understand more about parthenogenesis and this whole divine birth concept? What led you to writing the book?
Right. Well, there were so many factors that prepared me, actually. I think subconsciously I was preparing myself. There's no other way to explain it, but I've always been interested in the deep mysteries of creation and what happens after death.
Yeah.
And how about before death?
Yeah.
And I had read quite a lot of Edgar Cayce material. With a good friend of mine, we used to get together and smoke cigarettes and go through long lists of Edgar Cayce subject material. And I was always interested in the occult, which is just hidden knowledge.
Yeah.
But one day I was, well, let's see, I had graduated high school, and I was plunging myself into music, learning different instruments. And then I was watching TV one day, and this man, about 10 years older than me, Victoras Kalvinskas, appeared on public TV, and he was demonstrating raw food. And wheatgrass and sprouts, and he had all kinds of different recipes of raw food on this table. And it was he was being interviewed, and it turned out he was the co-founder of Hippocrates Health Institute in Boston. They were the pioneers of wheatgrass and sprouts, and he co-founded it. Well, it was Dr. Ann Wigmore, who was in her 60s at the time. And one thing led to another. I was very influenced by what he was saying. And so I wrote to the TV station, and it took quite a while, and I got an answer in the mail. And then I mailed an inquiry to Hippocrates Health Institute, which at the time was called Rising Sun Christianity.
Okay.
And that's because of the work of this man named Edmund Bordeaux Zicali. And this particular man did a lot of research on the Dead Sea Scrolls and similar manuscripts originally written in the Aramaic language. And he did some direct translations from the Aramaic into English. And it was what it revealed was the roots of Christianity on the Dead Sea by the early Essenes. But anyway, they had, it was just so amazing because I was raised Roman Catholic, and so I had that imagery in my subconscious. And what he revealed was pretty amazing, and it was an inspiration for what they call their institute. But they shifted over pretty quick to Hippocrates because Jesus Christ Superstar, like in 1970, 69, was taking off, and they just didn't want to be associated with like newborn Christianity. So they went back to Hippocrates, and Hippocrates was a student and a teacher and a healer, and he was promoting almost the same type of thing, that life comes only from life. So he to enjoy good health, you must eat food that's alive because you're alive. And it's basically matching your vibration to the vibration of food. If you eat food that's vibrating, I'm not talking about raw flesh.
Right.
Yeah, that you'll benefit from the energy. It's like matching resonance, which is very Egyptian. A lot of the early Greeks learned. Were schooled by Egypt in many different sciences, and I keep finding more and more information about that. And so it's interesting that Hippocrates is the father of Western medicine.
Yes.
One of his concepts was life comes only from life, and so here I am reading about the Essenes, and they're saying the same thing: life comes only from life. But so I ended up going to Hippocrates and working there. They liked my artwork, which they used for their, I think it was like a monthly publication, more like a newsletter.
Oh, neat.
And I was just 18. It was the spring of March, and I started drinking chlorophyll, the wheatgrass, which is 80% chlorophyll. Under the microscope, the molecule of chlorophyll resembles almost exactly the molecules of human blood, or hemoglobin.
Oh, wow.
I think magnesium is what's missing in chlorophyll. Otherwise, it would be identical. So it obviously it's the food chain, the beginning of the food chain.
Right.
It's, sunlight is captured through photosynthesis in greens, and we're not made to digest the fiber of greens, no doubt. So they would squeeze the grass with a type of grinder, and it squeezed it, and so we would drink the juice, and it was really an amazing beginning for me in so many ways. So I had a physical, mental, and spiritual regeneration that took place in a matter of weeks, of days. I went onto that diet immediately, 100%. There was no cooked food, no bread, no dairy products, nothing except greens and fruits and vegetables that were organic, and a couple of shots of wheatgrass a day.
Oh, very good.
But what really got me going mentally, intellectually, was I had access to the personal libraries of Viktoras Kulvinskas. He's the author of a very famous book called The Survival into the 21st Century. And Dr. Rand had a book, or many books too. Anyway, all of that can be looked up pretty quickly, but I had access to their personal libraries, which were pretty amazing. A great source for inspiration was written by this man. He's called Hilton Hotema, and I'm going to put a picture up of the Ankh, the Egyptian Ankh. See if I get it. Here it is.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
It's got a very feminine vibe to it.
I know.
Very goddess-like.
But it truly is, it's the yin-yang symbol of Egypt.
Yeah.
The upper ovoid circle represents, according to Hilton Hotema, the original root race of self-perpetuating Eve. And when I read that, I think the top of my head blew off.
Wow.
And then the cross is the masculine image, the masculine energy.
Right.
And the masculine grounds the feminine. It's symbolic of the left brain. The left brain is the masculine side, and it's like the janitor.
Mm-hmm.
And it serves the right brain, which was represented by the egg, which came before the male.
Right.
So if I put it up like this, you got the symbol of Christianity.
Yeah.
And it's also a symbol of death and transformation when it stands by itself. And we're pretty much in a culture that is death-oriented.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the patriarchy.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
It is militaristic. I mean, there is a beauty to the cross as well, but that indicates transformation. Very few of us get to transform our consciousness without losing our body. And in a way, the patriarchy is saying, if you want to be good, you want to be a perfect citizen, then you have to be willing to die for the patriarchy, for God, the male God.
Right.
So anyway, the Egyptians, according to Hilton Hotema, he was talking about how the Egyptians, first of all, the Ankh is everywhere in Egypt. It's the yin-yang symbol, and they felt it was extremely important to keep the feminine attached to the masculine energy. It's extremely important to have a culture that's based on a balance of yin and yang, male and female, so that they participate in government and religion, in the economy, in the structure of the family. It means, I mean, it's an endless. You could probably write several. I mean, there are lots and lots of books on the Egyptian Ankh.
Yeah.
I realize this is only a glimpse, but I think it's the ultimate glimpse, just because of Hilton Hotema's reference to the ovoid circle as being the representative of the original root race of self-perpetuating Eve. And of course, Eve is the root of evil.
Of course.
So yeah, as
funny how they made that happen, you know.
yeah, you know. So anyway, the danger of separating the cross from the circle is obvious. We're in that period, or I should say, we're re-emerging from that period
Yes.
of darkness, the Piscean age, and we're entering the age of enlightenment and connection and a love for mankind, and which includes womankind.
Yes.
So all of that was in that symbol, and that really started me off, because he spoke a lot about the superior biological attributes of women, and the idea that they could then, and they possibly can again self-conceive. And the purpose for self-conceiving this way, which is difficult under the best circumstances, is to give birth to a child. Well, let me put it this way. I have to put my geek glasses on.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, just to read this one quote, so we'll get to the gist of it right away. And it is, this was channeled, I think, in 1910.
Oh, wow.
And
Was that by Casey?
no, this is channeled by, well, it's in my book in the notes of it. Let me
Oh,
see,
okay.
turn some light on here. Okay. The life force itself acts as a fecundating power. This leads the way to a creative mutation, a new product of evolution, a new type of human being who is not born from ancestors and is consequently free from the inertia and karma of mankind's past.
Very
So-
beautiful. Actually, I found it as you. I thumbed through and I landed right on it. It was meant to be.
Oh. Yeah, before we get too far along, too, I want to mention we couldn't have chosen a better day, and we didn't really choose this because of astrology. Today, the 19th, being pretty much a new moon.
Yes.
It's the crone wise woman energy turning into the young virgin maiden.
Yes.
The original trinity is the crone, which is the waning moon, the dark side of the moon, the wisdom, the shadow of consciousness, the
Yes.
conscious. So that's the crone. And then we have the virgin young maiden, that's the new moon. And then there's the full moon, which is the mother. That's the original trinity.
Yeah.
The maiden, the mother, and the crone. And that was turned into the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I
that-
never quite figured how they layered that into the divine
Yeah.
feminine triple aspects of the goddess.
I originally saw that in a book called, you might be familiar, it's called Bringing Down the Moon.
Oh, drawing down the moon, yes.
Drawing Down the Moon, yes,
Yeah.
and I saw that. But I've seen that in other pagan literature.
Mm-hmm. Margot Adler, she was amazing.
Yes. She also said, and I looked it up too, that, excuse me, the meaning for pagan is country dweller.
Yeah.
You know, and I went to Catholic school, and there was a public school just a few blocks away, and the nun said that that's where the pagans went. And that was a pretty strange, like you got to watch out for those pagans, those country dwellers.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got a blast out of figuring that out. But today's aspects are so amazing. I just boil them down. There's imagery. That quote that I read about self-fecundating
Yes.
came from a book called The Sabian Symbols, which is hard to explain, but anyway, there's an image every time a planet arrives at one of the 360 degrees of a circle. And the sun being in Virgo right now, one of the images is a group of women meet ceremonially to perform a secret ritual.
Oh.
And there's also, I think, the opposite of that, the access image would be over in Pisces. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
Right. It would be harvest moon. There is a karmic moment. This is a karmic moment. And it's the seed of a new cycle right now, this moment. Okay. And now the moon is conjunct the sun because it's a new moon.
Yeah.
And according to pagan literature, according to astrology, ancient wisdom, the new moon is more powerful, more fantastic, just more everything than the full moon.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things a new moon brings is hope and a lifting of depression and a sense of going forward. But the moon is in Virgo, and some of the imagery is growth in consciousness regarding the wonders of nature, hope for the future, the need to bring down to earth realizations manifesting from peak experiences.
Oh, wow.
And
that sounds appropriate.
That's it. And then Mercury in Virgo as well is together with Mars, only a few degrees separated. So we have the image of Mercury in Virgo saying the unveiling of mysteries long protected by secrecy.
Mm.
That's the message for today. And Mars is pushing that as well because it's conjunct with Mercury, and the image for Mars is understanding born through transcending duality. So that's why the Ankh is very important.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Our lesson for today, children, is this ancient, probably 60 or 80,000 years old. We don't really know.
Yeah.
Part of the Kemetic culture. Now, one of the inspirations I'm going to tell you about, you just interviewed Stephen Miller.
Yes,
right?
Yeah. Great guy.
Yeah, he and Christopher Dunn were part of the Kemetic team that went to Egypt on a tour. They were all tour guides, and in 2012. And they visited the Temple of Hathor. And are on YouTube watching Stephen rant and rave wonderfully like he does.
Yes.
This man's like a fountain of fire and wisdom. He's amazing.
Yes.
I love him, and we chat occasionally. I read both of his books, and which is one of the reasons why I contacted you. I felt like the timing was right.
Yeah.
You had just interviewed Stephen, and it was a great interview, as usual. This man is so inspiring, but here he is on YouTube in 2012, just after finishing the tour, and he was talking about the Temple Hathor and how they used to practice divine birth there. And of course, the light went on in my head, and that's all he said about it. And I had just finished the book called The Cult of Divine Birth in Ancient Greece by Margaret Riggle. She's a profound scholar, among other things, a researcher, and she spent like 7 years on this book. And she saw links.
Oh. Well, hold that thought. We've got a commercial break coming up, and we'll pick up where we left off just after this break. We'll be right back, everybody.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
And welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We are the #1 listener-supported radio station in the world. So if you are over at freedomslips.com, why don't you go ahead and make a small contribution? It's what keeps the network alive. We've got, I think about 30 or 40 radio shows, two channels, Station A, Studio A, Studio B, and it's your support that keeps the radio station going. So thank you for that. And before we went on the break, Dan, you were talking to us about an author that had written a book. What was it? The Greek cult of self-regeneration or something like that?
That was cool. The Cult of Divine Birth.
Ah, there we go.
In ancient Greece. And so, yeah, here's Stephen Meller just returning from the tour of Temple Hathor, talking about divine birth, how the ancient Egyptians used to practice that. And so light went on in my head. I thought, oh, there's got to be a way to get in touch with these guys. And I hadn't read any of his books yet, but I've read Christopher Dunn's The Giza Power Plant.
Yeah, that's a great book.
So I just thought the next time these guys go through the Temple Hathor, they might want to they might want to know a little bit more about this divine birth idea. And they can have another layer of interest to add to their trip, you know? But I didn't know how to get in touch with Steve, but I had already read Chris's book, and I went to his website, and I told him I had an article out on the internet. My book was an article before it turned into a book.
Right.
You know, my book is like 5 times the length of the article.
Right.
But I asked him, I said, would you be interested in, I'll send you the link. And he said, sure. And about 4 or 5 days later, I hear from him. He sends me an email, and he said, what a wonderfully written article, Dennis. Thank you very much. And he said, I'll be sure that my goddess friends have the link. And he said, let me know when your book is ready, and I'll see if I can forward it to his publisher.
Oh, great.
I said, how wonderful. But anyway, what happened that I didn't know was that his next tour in Egypt, there was a woman there named Helen who he could tell she was very hungry for all kinds of, interesting information about everything they had to say about the tour. And he told her about my article and gave her the link. And that was like 2012, 2013, I don't know, something like that. But, about 5 years later, I get a phone call, well, first an email and then a phone call from this woman named Helen. And she told me she had read the article and she wanted to know if there was any more information. And I told her about the book, and we talked for about an hour. She was amazing. But she told me the connection was through Christopher, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
And
so what was the book that you're talking about?
Yeah, it linked.
What was this cult all about?
Right, the cult of divine birth in ancient Greece. And it's amazing that, Margaret Riggle, as a scholar, wasn't pursuing parthenogenesis, but it kept popping up in her research year after year. And finally, she said, what if they were actually pursuing this subject literally, and it just wasn't it wasn't like a symbolic thing. They were really, and so everything unraveled after that. She began to understand and penetrate the really confusing Egyptian mythology. I mean, Greek mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for instance, Athena being born from the skull of Zeus, which is completely stupid.
Hercules born out of his knee,
Yeah, and it's like, Adam's rib becomes a vagina, and there's Eve,
Right, yes.
And it's like, but anyway, essentially, it's the truth, but it's in reverse.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and
well, that would make more sense.
So anyway, she found some definite links to that the Egyptian the early ancient Greek priestesses learned the art science of parthenogenesis from the ancient Egyptians.
Ah, very interesting.
Yeah, and that was just one of the links. I mean, there's also all the medicine that Hippocrates learned, and a lot of philosophy and the sciences that the Greeks learned from the Egyptians. And there's many, many links to different sciences over the centuries, and how, look at the architecture, the columns. I'm sure the Greeks learned a lot from Egypt.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so, whatever was before Kemet as well, who knows where that information came from.
That is so deep, it's so gratifying to know that it's so deep.
Yeah. Dan, I have a question, because it just keeps popping in my head as you're talking about this. I can't help but notice I want to say the parallel mythologies, like in, Christianity, in Egypt, where we have Osiris and Isis giving birth to Horus from a wooden phallus, which is basically a divine birth. And also we have it in the birth of the Buddha, Siddhartha. His mother supposedly was visited by an elephant and got pregnant. So, did you find like a common reason behind these stories? Or is this just a way of explaining parthenogenesis?
Yeah, I think it's a way of explaining parthenogenesis, because they had, it's always going to be mysterious, most likely, until we have a woman that claims to be pregnant that way, and if her DNA can be tested, and then of course if her child can be privately and quietly just observed as the child grows, to see if this child is different, if it does have special gifts or not. And that's part of the controversy, is that it kind of puts normal birth and normal children in a shadow of inferiority, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to think, because every child, every creature really has a gift from the Creator,
And you're making me think as well. I guess you're kind of hinting to it. The reason why divine birth was strived for. I can't help but think of, I don't know if you've ever read Moon Child by Aleister Crowley. Talks of something very similar, of this divine child that they're trying to create magically, and I can't help think about that. Is that the reason why we hear these stories, that the parthenogenesis is to create a magical child, a divine child, and as you said, all children are divine in their own way, but was that the intention? Is that why they strive? Why the ancient women strove for this?
Right. Well, I think of the Ojibwa or the Chippewa people, and I covered it very briefly in my book. I was doing a review on the Chippewa people in 1973, I think. And I was reading just, like the story of all these different stories that were recorded by the author. He wanted to get all the stories he possibly could from the Ojibwa people before the coming of the white man. And right in the middle of this book pops out this story about the wise women observing generation after generation. Sometimes the generation would they were looking for young women that were like had potential to give birth in this ancient way, and sometimes it would skip a generation or two, but the knowledge remained, and they would always observe to see if a candidate appeared. And a candidate to them would be somebody, a young woman that showed very high intelligence and a natural empathy and compassion, and so she would be approached, and if she was willing, she would postpone marriage. And so it was known throughout the village that she was hands off. She was not to be courted. And but the reason for these births, according to the Ojibwa people, is that a child born through these conceptions are highly gifted. And there it is in a nutshell, but I mean, you think of all the major religions, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus. Of course, we're coming from a patriarchal background, so all the avatars are like male,
Yeah, of course.
But in Margaret's work, Margaret Riggle's work, in her 2 books on the Greek priestesses, she shows the lineage of parthenogenetic women giving birth to other parthenogenetic women, like Athena, the inventor of democracy. Her mother was born that way as well, and so was Athena. And then another link to the American Indians is the peacemaker about 1,200 years ago. He was virgin born, and he unified the 6 confederated tribes of New England and brought the Tree of Peace and the laws of the Tree of Peace and created a form of democracy.
Oh.
That
of which ours is based off of, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. William Penn and Benjamin Franklin were enthralled by how the Six Nations Confederacy worked, that each clan and village would elect a representative that would meet with other representatives, and each representative had a list of issues particular to each tribe or village, and they would all meet, and they would elect a senator that was the head of like 4 or 5 or 6 clans, and then the senators would meet with other senators, and they worked out a lot of problems. So they stopped warring against each other for about 1,000 years of peace with the 6 confederated nations.
And this came from a divine child.
Yeah, and it was inspired by a divine child. And so you get William Penn and you get Benjamin Franklin that were steeped in the knowledge of democracy from Greece that was given from a divine child. So we have here in America potentially the most powerful form of democracy on the planet. But we've still yet to really make it come into fruition. I mean, it gets corrupted so quickly. Democracy is as vulnerable as it is strong. And so it's the people that could use our form of democracy to create a wonderful, wonderful country and thereby inspire the rest of the world with our wonderful democracy. But it's so militaristic and it's so patriarchal and it's so drenched in testosterone and warfare that, we barely have a chance of surviving, never mind having a wonderful democracy.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think of when you're saying that patriarchal democracy is different than matrifocal democracy.
So anyway, I don't know where we are with all of this, but what does it have to do with a woman giving birth to a child, But I need to make another update on my book because about a year ago, I got a flood of phone calls from a woman in Australia, a woman in Mexico, women in Canada, a few women here in America. And I was able to connect several of them with each other. One woman in particular, she absolutely claims beyond a doubt that she was inspired to the point of conceiving a child just by a constant meditation on Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of the ancient Mayan Aztec people. That she gave birth to a boy, which kind of breaks the rules of parthenogenesis. Because the strict rules of science say that only females can be born through parthenogenesis and never a male. Well, it doesn't make sense. How did Jesus get born? How did Buddha, Zoroaster? That breaks the rules. But when on the lower species, for the most part, 99% of the time, they do give birth to just females. But I saw that rule broken a couple of years ago when these Komodo dragons on this little island there gave birth to males all of a sudden, because there were no males in this area where they were. There had been no males in this area where the Komodo dragons were for a long time. So the scientists were saying, and scientists don't easily say something unless they have solid proof. And this came from a science report, and they couldn't figure out how and why a male was born. And then right around that same time, there was another article that appeared about a snake that had been in captivity, a female snake, for many years. And all of a sudden, they didn't even know it was pregnant. It just gave birth to males. And they go, wow, that breaks the rule, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So science has to adjust itself and stop saying that only females can be born through parthenogenesis. So let's get out of that, please.
We're getting close. We got about 6 more minutes left, Dan. And according to Mayan and Hopi traditions, and actually many of us around the world are saying that we're experiencing the return of the sacred feminine. What does that look like, and what does that mean to the parthenogenesis concept?
Oh, it means everything. Because I've been sitting alone with this information since 68, 69. Until I linked up with Margaret Riggle to begin with, and then the Mayan prophecies of the return of the sacred feminine, and then I just manifested the book finally, and so the timing for everything is just so perfect, and we need to encourage bringing in the sacred feminine, however and whatever it means to each and one of us, and then as we do that, the sacred masculine comes to the surface and goes, oh, there's no threat here for me. It means liberation for the men. The males can figure out their role, as a ground, as like the custodian. We're going to watch the back, of the women in our life, of our feminine side. He said it's okay to have all of these emotions. It's okay to be vulnerable at times. And then we have a strength to protect that vulnerability and to make it come to the surface when need be, but not to create wars with that strength, to prevent wars with that strength, like a Gandhi thing.
Yeah.
So that's the masculine when it's healthy. And but we need to be protecting something besides our ego, and that's called the feminine side, our right brain, music, philosophy, compassion, poetry, art, oracular skills, astrology, healing, astronomy, herbology, paganism, which means the love of and worship of nature.
Yeah.
And that's all right brain activity. That's the purpose of life, is our right brain, is our feminine side. And the masculine side is to ground it and to give it logic and to give it protection. And it's pretty simple. We got the Ankh again, here we are. Now, I'm holding it upside down because we're in the middle, we're kind of like this right now, but we're coming from the masculine dominating the feminine, the cross of death on top of the earth, It's like a fundamental Christian image.
Yeah.
There was a nun that had that on her desk. One of the nuns, when I was a child, going to grammar school, it was like a plastic globe, but there was a crucifix on top of it. And essentially, it was the Ankh turned upside down.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Right. And she said, class, until the world is converted to Christianity, we will not have peace. And that's fundamentalism. And, the fundamental Islamic people, the fundamental ones, say the same thing. Unless the world is converted to Islam, there will be no peace. And it's like, bullshit. That's called patriarchy.
It's all patriarchal, and it's all the think like me or else mentality. Dan, I can't help but bring this up because I recently, I don't know if you saw my post recently, the universe saw fit to bring me the Power of Myth series 25 years after I saw it with Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell. And you mentioned that in your book where Joseph Campbell talks how the world is in need of a new myth, and that the virgin birth, even though he says not to take it literally, is a value of a spiritual tool for regenerating and recreating ourselves. So even for those that don't take Parthenogenesis literally, it's a spiritual tool, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, Margaret Riggle, she has workshops on this all the time. And yeah, she recognizes the psychological, emotional, spiritual value of this idea of self-regeneration. And, like artists recreate themselves, like Bob Dylan from one album to the next is so different. You go, is this Bob Dylan?
Yeah, exactly.
So artists infamously recreate themselves. So that's the principle of Parthenogenesis. And I believe that's what the whole universe, the entire universe is like a uterus. And then we get to study the mystery of black holes. The Mayans considered the black hole of our galaxy to be like a womb. Where did that idea come from?
Yeah.
So perhaps, it's what's so above, so below.
Yes. And well, with that, Dan, I hate to say this, but we're out of time. We're about to be cut off. So I just want to give you an opportunity. Where can people find more information on you and the Parthenogenesis book?
Right. It's very easy.
So it's available on Amazon.com, correct?
Easy to find.
Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for listening. This was a great show, and I thank you all for joining us today. We'll be back next week with a consciousness talk. Thank you.
Thank you.